Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Knox, CEO and founder of VitVio, a computer vision-driven surgical ops platform that's raised $2 million in funding. Thomas, what's up, man?
Hey, pleasure to meet you. Nice to be here, Brett.
Yeah, super excited to have you here. Let's jump in. What are you building?
Yeah, I guess on a really high level, essentially what we're doing is we go into surgical operating theaters, deploy 5 to 10 cameras into the ceiling, and then start tracking like all the people, equipment, fixtures, fittings, processes, et cetera. And then use that to visualize the operating room in 3D to kind of understand who's doing what, when, where, why, within the context of an operating room. We then deploy AI agents on top of that to take over some of the administrative work and orchestrating the teams across the hospitals to help drive efficiency.
How do you end up in this world? Like, what were you doing in your life prior to this? You say, you know what, the surgical operating room needs change.
Yeah, I guess maybe to get to that, I'll kind of go into two levels. Like first off, about the technical background and how we got to that in the first place and what drove into healthcare specifically. Yeah, over the last decade or so, I've had the pleasure of helping build a couple of hypergrowth startups that have gone from that 0 to billion mark in various industries. Some of the people you might even know of these, like if you've ever heard of Kiwi.com, it's like an online travel company similar to Skyscanner, Kayak, etc. And if you haven't heard of it, I'm sorry, you're going to see it everywhere now. But I joined that when it was like sub 10 people. And then over the next 3.5 years, we went from 10 people to 3,000 people and nearly $1 billion revenue. So it's a wild ride, as you might imagine. Did a couple other things in between, but kind of most relevant to what we do at VitVio is I was head of product and part of the executive board for a company called iFi, which I guarantee you've never heard of. But what we were doing is building autonomous stores, this concept where you can kind of walk in, take an item, walk out without any checkout. A similar one like that everybody knows about is Amazon Go. That's one that had the kind of most publicity. But actually, iFi is larger than Amazon in that space. So we actually would go in, white label it, and sell it to the retailers like Aldi, Tesco, Walmart, Dollar General. These guys, there's a bunch of stadiums and airports, et cetera, that kind of are using the technology. And did that for a couple of years. So I joined that before we even had a single store, scaled that up to actually surpass Amazon in the number of autonomous stores. And then, focused on how do we get these autonomous stores to mass market. Now, when I was coming to the end of my time there, I kind of stepped out and I was saying, hey, I want to try to figure out what's next. And actually, funny enough, I went on a sailing trip with my now co-founders in the north of Scotland. And I actually only knew one person on the boat, but we were out there and this was kind of a moment of saying, hey, I want to do a bit of self-reflection and figure out what makes sense to take the next step. And I just really connected with the guys there and was saying, hey, I know I want to create something, but not really sure what it is yet. And unfortunately, though, as soon as I stepped off that sailboat, I got a phone call that nobody wants to get. I got a phone call that my father had passed away actually that evening. One day he's there, next day he's not. He passed away from heart failure. And I don't know how to explain it to you other than you wake up in the morning the next day and you look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, I'm not doing what I should be doing. I'm not making the impact that I want to have. And I felt like I was maybe just chasing what I thought was really cool at the time. And I knew that I needed to kind of make an adjustment there. So at that moment, I basically started kicking off. Of course, I went through a period of recovery, trying to, cope with the fact that I just lost my father. But at the same time, started looking into what could I possibly do that would have an impact that might be more meaningful than, for example, an autonomous store. And I sat down, I started going with my co-founders and I said, hey, let's start researching and speaking to hospitals. So we spoke to hundreds of clinicians, hospitals, hospital executives, et cetera, and just trying to look for the points where people are repeating the same issue over and over. And we just kept hearing about the operating room. That's kind of this black box. There's a lot of inefficiency. People are under pressure, with aging populations, rising costs, et cetera. It's just getting harder and harder, not easier. And yet the systems are so outdated. And this kind of drove us in that direction of saying, hey, this might be a really good space for us to look into. So when we started to do the research, you realize not a lot of people know this, but operating rooms are kind of the beating heart of any hospital. They make up about 40% of a hospital's expenses and 60 to 70% of the revenue. So it's like everything is driven around the operating room within a hospital. So as we started to dive into it, we found really, serendipity of our skills and expertise with the problem that was within the market.
When you have an idea like this, where do you begin? So you observed this problem, you saw there was an opportunity, you're mission driven, you're motivated, what comes next? Where do you begin?
Ton of research. Assume you know nothing. I always say this though, I say you should have strong opinions held lightly. So basically go in there with some strong opinions on what might be the area to innovate on. But at the same time, be ready to throw those opinions away as soon as you get more information that adds to the context. So what we did is we started to form an opinion slowly, whittling away at it by speaking to more and more clinicians. And when I'm telling you hundreds, we were talking to hundreds of people. You're doing tens of interviews a day, just trying to really figure out where is the center point that all of this stuff starts to, where does it fall apart? Where is that frustration that we're hearing coming from? And then you start to try to talk to more specialized roles and dive deeper into that. And eventually you start to paint this picture of, okay, here's where the problem areas are. How can you potentially solve it? We didn't go in with a solution at first. We went in with this, figuring out what is the problem, then followed the solution. And like I said, serendipity, and as luck would have it, is, the operating theater, there's just so much admin work. A staff in an operating room spend about 40% of the time on admin. So we were saying, okay, this could be a spot where we can go in, and our skill sets in computer vision and our background with the autonomous stores really lend quite well to this. So started to pull together a team that actually worked with me at these autonomous stores or in a similar space, and saying, okay, let's take our expertise from these other industries and try to do a bit of a transition there.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
When did you get your first paying customer? How long did that take?
Yeah, so the first 3 to 6 months were completely self-funded on doing research. So I was actually paying out of pocket to get us to start doing deeper research. I wouldn't even really consider that it's the start of the company yet. It was more let's just try to figure out what makes sense. When we went all in and said, okay, we know what we want to build and we know where we want to target, I would say it took about another 3 to 6 months to get the first hospital. And it's really, we're masochists, right? So going into healthcare is one of the hardest industries to innovate on because hospitals just move quite slowly. But we wanted to double down on that difficulty and go into the NHS. So the NHS, the National Healthcare System in the UK, the public healthcare system, is definitely one of the most difficult nuts to crack, but they also have the biggest challenges with backlogs. Backlogs of nearly 7 million people waiting on a list for surgery when you have a country of nearly 60 million. So over 10% of the population is waiting. So we went in, and I would say it's about 6 months for us to lock in that first contract. And we also went in with a paid pilot at first, which made it also a little bit more difficult because hospitals like free stuff. So they're willing to move if you're willing to do it for free. But the thing is that if they're willing to do it for free, it does not mean that they'll convert later. So we wanted to prove that they're willing to not only do just get a free lunch, but they're also willing to pay and expand with this because it shows commitment.
What do you think these early groups saw in you to trust you and to give you and your co-founder a chance? Like we've talked about, you didn't come from this world necessarily. You were a surgeon in your prior life and you now want to solve this problem for yourself. What did you do to build trust?
Yeah, I think in the first case, hospitals right now are in a very unique position that since COVID, they've been struggling really, really hard to keep up with margin crunches, staff shortages, et cetera. So they're in this mind of they need to innovate and the old ways don't work anymore. So I think it was a lot about timing. And I really didn't want to highlight timing matters the most on any aspect. If you go in at the wrong time, you're not going to get anywhere when, maybe a year or two later, you'd be able to move very quickly. I think we've been able to move quickly because we timed it almost perfectly when it comes to that. The second thing that we did, though, is trust through, let's say, previous connections. If you're going to cold call and try to cold email hospitals, it doesn't work. The best way that we found was to go into, for example, go on LinkedIn, find the top surgeons at certain hospitals and say, hey, I want to talk to you and show you what I'm thinking, and I want to get your opinion. And that's clearly, first off, is you can use that as a product insights, but also it opens the door really quickly to other potential commercial activities. Because if you go and you try to reach out to a hospital executive, they're going to tell you from the outset, no, I don't want to talk, or they won't even respond. There's just too many, they get so many of these things flooding in. But if you go to the top surgeons, they don't get as many of these. You can get really valuable insight, and no hospital on the planet will reject a meeting with their top surgeon. So we went in and we got a bunch of really amazing advisors from the outset that were leading surgeons or thought leaders within the space that then, helped us open that first door. Once you get that door open, you have that first conversation and you're hitting the right marks in the conversation of what are the key focuses of this hospital and what their goals are. Then from there, it kind of takes its own life. But really opening that door, I would try to find really great advisors that are strong within that area, or maybe even worked at the hospitals that you're targeting previously or work there currently, and use those as kind of a leverage to open the door in the first place.
When it comes to the market category, what's the market category that your customers are buying? Are they in market for a surgical ops platform and then you're coming in and saying, hey, we've got a computer-driven one, it's better, faster than everything else in the market? Or is it a different category and you're saying, no, 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 you need a platform like ours?
Yeah, I would say the category that they're buying into is, we even say this kind of ourselves internally, is that we're not a healthcare company, we're an AI company in healthcare. And that this is the kind of mindset change that we want to drive, is that when we're going in and talking to these hospitals, we're selling them an AI solution that's focused on the operations within the flow. So like an example is, we'll come in and we'll say, hey, we deployed these cameras into the ceiling. When we'll start, like the first step that we'll do is we'll look at the stages of the surgery and automate the detection and logging of those into your EHR system. So when did the patient arrive? When was knife to skin? When was wound closure? So on and so forth. And then use that as a context to A, write it away so they don't have to log this information manually, but B, to orchestrate those teams. So like when you're getting to that last 20 minutes, we'll send off the alerts to the preoperative team, the preoperative nursing staff, to prep the next patient automatically. Because the goal here is all about reducing the turnover times without adding additional strain to the teams. So I think the step here is that there are solutions that are for, operating room management that exist. But like every single one of the platforms that exist on the market today are all manually driven. It's like you have to have a human that inputs something and drives it themselves. And that is adding an additional layer of complexity and, distracting them from what's most important, the patient. And that's where we come in and say, hey, let's like fix that. The tools should be working for the staff, not the staff working for the tools ultimately. And really what we're selling to them on in this kind of positioning is around, AI-driven administration, AI-driven orchestration, and getting kind of stepping in that direction.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
If you think about milestones, what's a recent milestone that you celebrated that you're really excited about? And take us back. How'd you achieve that milestone?
Yeah, one that I can talk about. So it's kind of difficult to talk too openly about these things because hospitals are pretty protective of information until they're ready to talk about it. But one of the ones that we celebrated recently is the 1st of this month, or 7th of this month, we did an announcement with the Royal Orthopedic. Royal Orthopedic is one of the top orthopedic hospitals in the UK. There's really only 3 core orthopedic hospitals in the UK, and we landed one of them, and I'm actually having discussions with the other ones as well. The Royal Orthopedic, though, coming in is really nice because basically what we're doing is going in and deploying into their operating theaters, taking over this administration and orchestration, and really saying, okay, they're doubling down on AI within the operating room becoming the standard. And I think that a lot of there's some wins here that I can't necessarily talk about too openly yet. But I think one of the other things that we're really excited about is kind of looking at where we're, like the trajectory that we're on. We're less than a year old, yet I can say, beyond the Royal Orthopedic, we're already talking to 9 out of the top 15 US hospitals, with some of those already in contract deadlines. So it's like, I think that because we timed it right in AI being a really big topic for trying to drive efficiency gains within the hospitals, we just timed it perfectly. And now we're getting this space where in the next couple of months, we're going to have some really big announcements coming up.
Amazing. What about expanding to the US? So as people are listening in, they can tell you got an American accent. What's the plan with the US market? And of course, you don't have to say names, but in terms of expanding to the US and having more of a presence in the US, what does that look like?
Yeah, to be super clear, for every single healthcare company on the planet, the US is the golden goose. It's the place where you have to be if you want to be a venture-backed, healthcare company. Yeah, there's opportunities in other markets, but if you want to be able to expand quickly and, grow at the rates that you should be growing at and be competitive, the US has to be your primary market, essentially. Over 40% of global spend on healthcare is happening within the United States. So with us right now, even though we started in the UK and that was kind of our bed, that's because that's the majority where our team is based out of. The US is our primary focus and will become even bigger primary focus in the next 12 months here. In fact, in a couple months here, we're going to be kicking off another fundraise. So we raised about 10 months ago, 11 months ago, and we're going to be going into another raise now in the next 2 months. And the majority of that will be actually setting up a base within the US. We're at yet, not sure. We're looking at a couple places like Boston, San Francisco, et cetera. But as we're going into this next fundraise, big piece will be setting up our presence here and expanding with the US hospitals. The interesting thing about the US with it being private healthcare is that it can move a lot faster. I would really say if anybody's going into healthcare to focus on private healthcare above all else, because private healthcare, just the levers make a lot more sense for them to move quickly. And there's a lot less committee, almost like when you're looking at the NHS, a lot of times you have to go through 5 to 6 layers of approvals before they can move forward with something. And you can be at the final round and then all of a sudden it's just, it's dead on arrival, even though everything else was looking great up to that. But US private healthcare, once they're good to go, they can expand quite quickly across system-wide rollouts. You know what I mean?
Makes perfect sense. What's that sales cycle going to be like? After
Oh God.
founders on and they're like, oh yeah, enterprise sales takes a while. Like maybe make them feel better. How long and how complicated is your sales process?
Oh, dude, you're gonna make me cry. No, the reality is when it comes to healthcare, you're gonna look at minimum 6 months from your first conversation. And some of those, it can go upwards to 12 months. And what I really say is to target the hospital, like in our case, we're targeting the hospitals that have new cash inflow, either took an investment or had a really good revenue, like, their profitability last year was extremely high or something like this. And avoid like the plague any hospitals that are going through technical implementation. So if they're making a move from like Cerner to Epic, like changing their EHR system, nothing else will move during that period of time. So you'd be wasting your time. You can have the conversations, but just realize that it's going to take 18 months because they're not going to do anything until 6 months after their implementation is done. So it really depends on the hospital system. One of the things that we're doing is that we've been targeting the biggest players in the market, especially with healthcare. They all follow suit on these biggest players. If you get a couple of the top 5 on board with you in the United States, all the other small players look to them for reference and validation. If those guys validate you, the rest will follow suit. So we've been spending a lot of our time on getting in the door with some of those biggest players in the market and knowing that it'll take time to get there. But once we have those, the rest will follow a lot faster, because you can spend a year trying to get some mid-level hospital to move. But if I have another, like one of the top 5 on board, you can drop that down to 3 to 6 months.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. We can even go 10 years, however far you want. What's the big picture vision that you're building here?
Yeah, our big picture vision is to go across the entire, let's say, patient flow end to end, from the moment that they arrive to the moment they leave, and automate as many steps of those as possible to get the staff focused on the patients rather than focused on administrative work. That means that we're starting with the operating room as kind of the center point because everything revolves around the operating room, but that's not where we're going to end. Looking at the preoperative wards, looking at post-op, looking at bed management and like guidance. We're even talking to some partners with them. We're taking a very open approach to partnerships with robotics companies and other AI like guidance systems and so on, and sharing data between us. I think our goal is to become the like operating system of the operating room and to then deploy AI agents to act as staff members, not to reduce the FTE or like reduce the number of staff that exist. Instead, quite the opposite, to get them working at the top of their license and focused on the things that are the most important, not, just doing administration, which is majority of their job today. We can automate that. That's the piece that we really want to focus on.
Amazing. I love it. All right, man. We're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders listening in that want to follow along with you and your journey, where should we send them?
Yeah, I would say add me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Thomas Knox, on LinkedIn. It's a fairly unique name, so people can find me pretty easily. Or follow us on LinkedIn at VitVio. You can kind of check where we're going and any announcements that we'll be having. There'll be some really cool stuff coming up soon, as well as any openings. If you've got so many rockstar engineers that want to help out in healthcare, there'll be some stuff coming up soon as well.
I feel with a name like this, you're just poised for greatness. Like you can't not do great things in your life. It's too great of a name.
Do you know what it means?
No, what does it mean?
It's actually the Latin roots for life path. So it's actually vit is life and vio is path. So it means life path in Latin.
That's awesome. I love it. Amazing, man. Well, thank you for taking the time. It's been a lot of fun. I'll be rooting for your success and look forward to having you back on in a couple of years to talk about all the amazing work you've done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.